So we will kick things off. Welcome to ONA 2016 Lightning Talks. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for coming. Give yourselves a round of applause. And if you ever are up here, be sure not to clap into the microphone. So I'm Greg Lynch. I work at McClatchy. I'm an ONA board member, and I will be today's moderator. We have a fantastic, oh, come on up. We have a fantastic group of lightning talkers for today. I will introduce each of them as they come up. They will have 5 minutes, and 5 minutes only. I will be timing them and keeping them honest with those times. And after each one is done, I'll introduce the next one, and then we go. And after they're all finished, we'll have a Q&A time. We have 2 runners with mics. Runners with mics, do you have your mics? Hello, runners. Oh, you don't need them yet, but yeah. Okay, good to know. All right, so without further ado, all right, we're doing this live. We're keeping it peppy. Is everybody awake? Yeah. Okay, all right, good. All right, I know it's the end of the day, everybody's tired, it's all right. Okay, so first up, we have Stephanie Arnold. Stephanie Arnold considers herself a digital immigrant, having been a print journalist for more than a decade before rebooting her skills for digital platforms. She's the lead producer for social media for the Philadelphia Media Network, the parent company of Philadelphia Inquirer, Philadelphia Daily News, and Philly.com. Her interests are in accountability journalism, journalism ethics, training, and of course, social media. Please welcome Stephanie.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Arnold, and I am the lead producer for social media at the Philadelphia Media Network. In between newsroom layoffs and a stint of other jobs that we don't have time to even go through, I've managed to practice the craft of journalism for 15 years. In that time, what I've learned is that almost everything we know about how we go about doing this business has and or will change. I'll repeat that. Everything we know about how we go about doing this business has and or will change. Now, if you've been in journalism or involved in some form of storytelling for more than a nanosecond, I'm not really telling you anything that you don't already know. It's no secret that with the proliferation of new technology, rebooting your skills is an inevitable endeavor. But there are some things in this business that are at the foundation of our identity as journalists. You've got to be a good storyteller. That will never change. The types of stories will, and the audience's interest will change, but I don't care about good stories, said no one ever. You're never going to hear that. Being correct is at the heart of our credibility. It's what sets us apart from the random blogger, and I'm excluding established, well-written blogs and other websites. It's how we establish trust with our readers, and it is how we build on relationships with our community as journalists. So accuracy remains important. But speaking of relationships, that's the third key. It is the very thing at the heart of what makes a story good enough or a Pulitzer Prize winner. Any reporter or editor will tell you that the relationships with their sources is an integral part of what determines how successful they are at their jobs, period. I'd argue that relationships is everything. The idea of this niche term, audience engagement, and the entree of platforms like Google Analytics, Omniture, Chartbeat, Social Flow, these are all created to measure our relationships with our readers. So what's our relationship like with our digital audience, particularly social media? How many of you will admit, and it's just between me and you don't have to worry about anybody else, but how many of us will admit, seriously, that whether now or in the past, that we've been in a one-sided relationship? It can be romantic, it can be, thank you, right? It can be romantic, it can be platonic, whatever. I have a friend who I love, I adore this person, but this person always comes to me with their problems, and they just tell me their problems, and this is what's happening, this is what's going on. And initially I was like, oh, this is great. We're establishing a relationship, we're bonding, this is so cool. This person is trusting me with all this intimate information about their lives. But the problem with that is when it was time for me to tell my story to this person didn't care. This person was ambivalent about what was going on, and when I asked this person for advice, it was a monosyllabic answer, like, yeah, or sure. That's us, right? That's us. Because I'm like, what kind of jerk does that? And then to quote the prophet, Michael Jackson, you got to look at the man in the mirror. We're takers. We're that friend who dumps all of their crap on our readers. Read our links, read our stories, take this poll, watch this video, comment on this. But when a reader dare ask us a question, crickets. Won't have anything for them. So again, what is our relationship to our social media audience? I've got 2 words for you. We suck. I'm like the president of the Suck Club. Very rarely do we reach out to those people who mentions us. So how about this? How about we put this really cool term about engagement into practice? I mean, I don't know. What about we actually engage the readers? People who take the time to write are the ones actually sharing her content. They're the ones who you want to respond to you. They're the ones who you want to establish trust and credibility with, and they're the ones who you will continue to brand your company with. I know what you're saying. Stephanie, I don't have time for that. I just don't have time for it. I got too much on my plate. I got to manage 22 social media accounts, whatever. I got to write stories. But here's the thing. If you were walking down the street and a reader stopped you on the street and wanted to talk to you about your story, would you just simply ignore them? Or would you make time to engage that reader? So I simply appeal to you, leave no mention behind. Thank you.
I can say we're starting things off right. 20 seconds to spare. Thank you very much. All right. Who can top that? So, now I need to pull up my bios again. All right. Next up, we have Jason Fields. Jason started working in online news at the Washington Post in 1995. Yes, 1995. Since then, he's worked at the New York Times, Associated Press, the dear departed Project Thunderdome, and is now managing editor at Reuters.com. Jason, take it away.
Hi. Boy, I sure hope I get this button right. It's big, it's green, and it seems to have an arrow. Let's see what happens. Okay, so this is actually aimed in some ways at people who are coming into the business, maybe a little bit younger, but I think it's advice we can all take. You are smarter than everybody else in the newsroom, okay? But that's your deepest secret. Don't fucking tell anyone, all right? So the point being, as you'll see in the next slide, what you have to do is actually show your editor. Your crusty old editor actually really doesn't want to hear it from you, and also really doesn't want to hear that there's a much better way of doing it without actually showing me, let's be honest here, without actually showing me the better way. I mean, you can talk forever, and believe me, you do. But if you can actually go out there and do the work, believe me, I'm more than happy to see it. I know there's a better way to do my job. I know I've been doing it since 1995, 96, and that I have not necessarily kept up with everything, that new things have come along, I've calcified. Show me a better way, and I will take your idea from you. So the next part of this is you will absolutely be bored. There are days at work when everybody is bored. The whole thing about journalism is it's not boring. You ever worked the night shift? It's fucking boring. And there are days when it's boring. And it's just the way anything is. So when you're bored, do something about it. I mean, you actually do have the power to do it. I know your mom said only boring people are boring, go play with something. There's a certain amount of truth to it. The only way I ever got anywhere in this business was I got bored, and so I started building something. You know, I had an idea for a story, or like the podcast I do now. I was kind of bored, you know, so what the hell, I'll build a podcast. So really, that's actually something, take advantage of it. Again, your editor will eventually be grateful, especially when you're right. And then, may seem somewhat unrelated, but it's actually something still about coming into the business. So, something to ask yourself every once in a while is, are you okay? You are surrounded by nastiness at all times. That's a big part of being a journalist. And This shirt, I saw this for the first time when I was 14 years old at a police supply store, and it answered all my questions, and I knew if I was either going to become a cop or a journalist. New York Homicide Squad. Our day begins when your day ends. If you find that funny, you're probably in the right line of work. If you don't find it funny, or you're having trouble finding it funny, which I think happens to all of us at one time or another, it's time to take a step back. When the Newtown Sandy Hook shootings took place, I had this opportunity, and opportunity is not really how I would think of it, but I got dropped to sort of write the main bar for the New Haven Register. And, you know, I didn't go to the scene. I was the editor taking in the copy and writing it up, you know, I was the old hand. And one after another, as I was writing the lead, the children's names just came out. You know, one little boy, 6. Beautiful little girl, 7. Another lovely boy, 6. And it was the staccato pulse. And I started crying as I was writing. And there were literal tears in the keyboard. It was a borrowed keyboard, so I'm really sorry about that, Mark. But this happens to people a lot. And we don't talk about it. Some companies have this new progressive thing where they actually try to get therapy for people, or if you have to talk. I've worked mostly in old line media companies. That doesn't exist. So my only advice, and this, the note sort of maybe a downer note to end on, but we do have to, you know, we stick together, we all go out and get drunk together, we buy t-shirts of questionable taste together. But if you do need something more than that, you know, the only person who really is going to know that and who will help you is yourself. You actually do have to take care of yourself, even when you're covering stuff that, you know, even if you're not on the scene, it still can have an effect on you. So that's my advice. Sorry to be such a downer.
Thank you, Jason. Up next, we have Janine Warner. She's an ICFJ Knight Fellow and co-founder of Sembra Media, a nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing the diversity of voices and quality content in Spanish by helping digital media entrepreneurs become more sustainable and successful. Janine?
Thank you so much, Greg. In 2013, my esteemed friend, colleague, mentor, Rosenthal Alves, and I were talking about MOOCs. And I said, I want to teach a MOOC in entrepreneurial journalism in Spanish. He said, that's awesome. I have no idea what kind of turnout we'll get, but let's try it. This organization is born very much out of that class. And the fact that more than 5,000 people signed up for that first MOOC, and hundreds of sites were born out of it. And I started to see this explosion of digital media in the region in Spanish. Sites like Efecto Cucuyo in Venezuela, where 2 courageous, award-winning journalists got together and created a website to provide independent journalism in a country where most of the traditional media has been co-opted. Sites like Integrados Chile by my friend Andrea Medina to serve an underserved community because she felt that people who were differently abled in Latin America were often underrepresented and needed more information than they were getting. And sites like this not only inspired me, I started to feel kind of responsible for them. And I decided that we really needed some kind of support organization that went way beyond a 4-week class. And I started studying models like the Online News Association, like Blog Her, like the Institute for Nonprofit News, which now serves as our fiscal sponsor, and Michelle's List, which works to categorize all of the English language digital media natives that she can find. And so I embarked on this ambitious research project to find all of the digital media sites in Spanish in the world that I could find. Nobody has a list. There's a list in Spain of a few hundred that was done by a professor, but they're quickly outdated. And I decided we needed a living, breathing, searchable database if we were going to be able to track best practices and reach my dream of ultimately creating a support organization. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. And I've been incredibly blessed over the last decade to be invited repeatedly to Latin America as a speaker, as a part-time teacher at universities. I teach modules and graduate programs, sometimes for the State Department. And I started adding a day or two to my trips to meet with the digital media entrepreneurs. And it's really the secret of how I was able to create this incredible team, most of whom run their own award-winning, extraordinary digital media sites. All of them work part-time. I pay them an honorarium out of grant money that I've raised. And they're helping me to catalog and to categorize all of these sites. I knew that I needed people who understood their markets. I knew that I needed people who were inside and knew what it was like to be an entrepreneur. And I let them work with great autonomy, but with a team that has their back. And that's really the model we have. We work together to create a criteria for inclusion about who should be part of this community. And as we finish developing the directory, we're about to hit 500 digital media sites in the region. I think we'll get to 800 or 1,000 when we're done. But I promised you guys some tools. And the way I manage a completely virtual team across 8 time zones starts with Zoom. I know a lot of you are familiar, but I'll tell you, we quickly outgrew Google Hangouts because it only supports 12 people at a time, and there's already 19 of us. Zoom is also really great for my very busy board of directors because not only can you log in by computer, you can also call in by phone. So sometimes when they're traveling, they'll call in and we'll just see a little phone instead of their face. It's also helped me deal with some of the bandwidth issues. So this is one of my ambassadors in rural Venezuela who didn't quite have enough bandwidth to show us her face, so she took a selfie to send us afterwards so we could feel her presence in the group. They're really becoming like a family together, and a lot of that is because we communicate so regularly with each other. We have a WhatsApp group. If you're from Latin America, you know what this is because it's so commonly used to create groups of shared practices, families, etc. But if you're in the US, I'll tell you it's a great example of leapfrogging. It's a text messaging system on steroids. If you're worried about security, Signal does similar to what WhatsApp does, but with encryption. I just discovered Emo because I have a person in Cuba now. Skype, Hangouts, and Zoom are all blocked there, but Emo seems to work for this. And Slack, if you don't know, is a great way to keep track of text messages and follow your team. And I'll end with one I'm guessing none of you have heard about. It's called Teleport. I had the honor of voting for it in an international contest I judged this year in Singapore. It's founded by one of the creators of Skype. And what you do is you type in all of the locations of all of your team members, and it tells you the best place in the world to bring them all together in real life. So I think we're going to go to Panama this year. Looks like I need about a $12,000 budget for that. I'll be taking donations. But seriously, I welcome your support, your ideas, your enthusiasm, your shared resources. I'm very much about partnering. I'm the founder, but I'm not the boss. And I really welcome your submissions and your suggestions. Thank you so much for your time.
Last, but certainly not least, Christopher Wink. Christopher Wink is co-founder and editorial director of Technically Media, which publishes local tech news and events network Technically, and as of fall 2015, social impact site generosity.org. In that capacity, he is a lead organizer of Philadelphia Tech Week and Baltimore Innovation Week, among other events that bring smart people together. Previously, he worked for a homeless advocacy nonprofit and was a freelance reporter. Chris?
Thank you, Gregory.
You're welcome.
It's funny how much of a jerk you sound like when someone reads your bio. It just sounds ugly. So I want to share an idea that we're working on or think through a lot in our organization. Another way to approach this is we're challenging ourselves and other newsrooms. We think we should rethink how we define competition. So a little background, I'm the co-founder of a small niche publisher called Technically Media, do about $1.5 million revenue in 2016, so we're small, 20 full-time, 5 part-timers. We publish 2 brands, but I'll use Technically for a couple of my examples. It's a little more established. We're in 5 East Coast markets, Philly, Brooklyn, Baltimore, Delaware, and DC. That's our team. So this is our mission statement at Technically Media. We convene the smartest people and organizations and industries that matter for local communities to thrive in the future. Doesn't say news or journalism. We are a business publication, and it's a strategy we use to execute on our mission. We think we're servicing our communities to help to make them better, and we think that journalism is the strategy we use to do that. We like to think about what is our competition, and a pretty traditional way to view that would say we are, in the technically sense of things, we're a tech and business news site, so technology and business publications are our competition. The business journals, the business publications at our metro dailies in our markets, all very familiar. That is who we would say our competition is. A slightly more adapted answer that we all use a lot is, well, we're competing with audience online, so everyone is competition, which is a nice thought, but incredibly unhelpful whenever we think about competition. Like, so sure, everything is competition in terms of audience and engagement. I don't think that's really helpful either. So instead, we're trying to think about lines of business, and that's how you should understand journalism organizations. So for us, we say journalism is a strategy, not an industry. It's a methodology we all in this room use to execute on a mission, execute on a business line. And that's what brings us together, not a shared business. So probably helps to define how we define journalism. So for us in our organization, we say it's the act of helping a community reach the closest approximation of its truth. That just means we want a community to better understand itself. So that's the transparency we care about, that's the challenging questions we care about, but writing a 700-word article with a nut graph never was necessarily the only way to do that. So again, journalism is a methodology to end at making your communities better. So the end product of being challenging to a community is you get this really great relationship with smart people. I presume all of us are proudly think that one difference between maybe the communities we build and other online audiences is I like to think we tend to believe we create really smart, engaged communities. That's what journalism is really good at. We say challenging things, so we are naturally going to build mostly an audience outside of our comments. We're going to build an audience of people who want challenging content. So it's smart and engaged people. So then logically you would say all of our organizations, nonprofit and for-profit, we're ultimately trying to say how do we provide enough value to our audience to be paid for it? Whether that be in the grant space, but if it's any number of business models you might have. That's essentially what we're all trying to do. So at Technically Media we talk a lot about we're developing the most sustainable business we can that uses the community journalism strategy. We are challenging our communities, and for all the times that a sponsor or client has pulled out and said you've been too critical of us, we'll try to say we are building the most authentic relationship with a community you care about. You need us, and we're the best partner for you. So it might help do a little window into how we make money. We were very early on the wave of events business. So in 2009, we were doing paid events. We also do sponsored content, some jobs board placement stuff, and some activations. And this lines up nicely with whom we actually consider our competition. So we do events. That means events businesses are who we're competing with. We do some talent, which is like a jobs board, basically. Recruiting firms are whom we're competing with there. Creative, content strategists. We do some, again, brand activation stuff. It's branding agencies. In all of those threads, we're competing with lots of different businesses, but we use journalism as our strategy. So any of us, and I presume that's all of us, who believe that journalism strategy is an important key to making communities better, that means we want all of our organizations, whatever business lines we succeed in, to win. And so it's worth to think about, there are lots of different business lines that journalism organizations can be in. We know this. You may sell data. You may essentially be doing events production. You may be essentially an affinity or membership group if you're a subscription pattern. There's any number of different business lines we're all in, but we're all using journalism as a strategy to build that relationship with the best audience. And frankly, I want all of these business lines to be owned by journalism organizations that have journalism DNA. So increasingly, even if you have beat competition, that's not who you're competing with. So in conclusion, I want you to rethink your competition. It's not just your beat. It's collectively we're using journalism to deploy a business line. So journalism is a strategy, not an industry. Thank you.
Can we get one more round of applause for all of the lightning talkers? Sure. Yeah. All right. We have another lightning talk. All right. You just want to, you can go for
I'll
it?
wing it. I don't
right.
need the PowerPoint. How lame is this? I was sitting downstairs having a beer, and I looked to see when the banquet was, and I saw your lightning talk got accepted, and your computer's dead, and your PowerPoint's not ready. So I'm going to wing it. But I think we can relate to this. Henry Ford did not build a better car. In fact, it was so shitty, it came with tools. I have the tools at home, little wrenches that you used to fix the car. You had to crank it if they knew it would break. What he did was build a better way to make a car. A more efficient way, a faster way, a more streamlined way, a cheaper way. This illustration I wanted to have to show you, and I can describe it. Have you ever seen a Rube Goldberg machine where the bowling ball has to roll down the chute, it's a fire to the candle, and that releases hits the mouse's tail, and then he bites the little string and it breaks? That's our workflow. Right?
Yes.
In most newsrooms, it's as sucky as that. Usually it's a technological reason. Well, the print CMS doesn't work with the online CMS, and the photo database thing, well, we haven't hooked that up yet. Oh, the consumer database, oh, that's a different thing. What a mess. We got to clean this stuff up. So my point is really, think about what you do in the workflow every day, and realize how many wasted touches you have on things. How many times you have to touch the same piece of content as you move it through the workflow. That's what Henry Ford fixed. Nice, simple assembly line. The illustration I had was an arrow. It goes in one direction toward the consumer. Here's what we do instead. Well, I created the package for the print thing, but someone else created another package, so now I've got to go find the thing I created and move it over there. But the photos are still in the other thing. Oh, they're online, and I got to download to my desktop to put them back in the print scene. Oh, I got my changes overwritten. Okay, now I got to fix that again. And we're spinning our wheels on these ridiculous things. My organization is working to have a much more streamlined tool for this. I'm not going to do a plug for it. I work with the Union Tribune, which is owned by Tronc and Tribune. But the idea is to give reporters something they don't need a degree to figure out, something they don't need to have 470 different fields to fill out, 300 they don't have to worry about. So I would recommend all of you, look at your workflows, and if it's not a simple arrow, remove those bulges, remove those twists, remove those turns, especially the ones that serve an audience of one. Think of the things you do in your office, well, that's the way he wants it. Well, that's the process we've done. Or we still slug things SD-ME because that's how we did it in Coyote, right? And we're doing that across the industry. It is hindering our creativity, it's hindering our expression, and it's adding extra hours in an industry where we have very few resources to do. So the message I have is, don't think you have to do something because you've been doing it all that way. Don't think you have to do something because that's what the tool requires. Really try to break out of that and think, what is the simplest path, the straightest path, the most linear, logical path to publication, and build that in your organizations. You will buy yourself time and you'll have a happier life. Thank you.
We'll get you another chair.
Oh, that's so nice.
Do we have an extra chair?
I'll stand. I crashed it anyway, so what the hell.
Well, you win on time. You had 2 minutes and 20 seconds left. So, all right, we're going to move on to the Q&A portion.
Greg, we don't know who the fifth person was.
Oh, Tom Mallory, would you like to introduce yourself a little? Oh, wait, we need on the
Tom
mic.
Mallory with the San Diego Union Tribune. I'm sorry, I was freaked out with a beer in my hand. I ran up here.
You did great for that, man. High five for showing up.
I told you we were doing it live, so yeah. All right, questions? No? Oh, okay, there we go. And please introduce yourself before your question.
Hi, my name is Mandy Hoffmackel. I'm over at Newsday. I just have a question, I believe, for Stephanie about what's the next level of leaving no retweet or no at mention behind? Is it how do you respond to Snapchats and people sending you messages on your Instagram stories, and how involved is that and how important is that compared to the at mentions, since those are public and some of these other things are private? Just want to get your thoughts on that.
Thank you. So what I think the way we prioritize is that we have to prioritize based on the needs of our organization and what we intend to do as journalists, and what our personal goals are, right? So if your goal for your news organization is to increase your engagement, which everybody says that their goal is to increase engagement in our industry right now, then part of that is prioritizing the comments or the ad mentions to make. I mean, some ad mentions don't necessarily need a response. I went through, actually, when I was preparing for this talk, I went through the 10 o'clock hour of ad mentions for one of our Twitter accounts, and there were about 30 within that hour that could have been answered. There were a bunch of others that were just comments or some sort of, ancillary reaction to a story, but there were some serious comments that could have and should have been answered. Like, for example, hey, this link is broken. And we should have been saying, hey, thank you so much for pointing this out to us. Here is the correct link. Or, hey, someone could respond to something with an incorrect facts or whatever, and say, oh no, nobody was ever arrested in that case, which is a real example from this morning. And it's like, actually, here's the link to the story where 3 people were arrested in that case. And so not only are you building the relationship, but you're also, in some of these cases, providing an opportunity for the reader to click on another piece of content if that's the appropriate route. So I think the first thing to do is, number one, prioritize what your responses will be. And I'm using Twitter for an example, but I mean, this happens on Facebook, as you stated, this happens on Instagram and Snapchat. I mean, there are all kinds of ways. The appropriate way to respond on each of those platforms will be different, but the main thing is that so folks know that you are responding and that you are listening, and so you're not that annoying friend who only dumps all of their content and links onto them, but you are actually attempting to engage in a meaningful dialogue with them.
Next question. And then we have one over here.
So Tom, in your drunken stupor, you sort of half addressed this, right? Which is stop doing stupid stuff in the workflow. But for all of you, not on your talk specifically, what else do we stop doing, right? We don't have enough people to do everything we used to do. We're doing a lot of stupid things. For anybody, what else do we stop doing in the newsrooms to pick up the more important stuff we should be doing?
Well, absolutely not part of my talk, but this is something I feel pretty strongly about. And we had a really good failure panel this morning that Julie Westball, who's sitting here, was on. Metrics, first of all. Find out what nobody's actually reading. Take a look at what no one's actually viewing. Stop doing it. It's so hard to get a company to do that, though. I mean, it's like my own company that I'm at now, admitting failure is so hard. Give up that newsletter that 5 people have actually opened up in the last 20 months. That takes your poor copy editor 6 hours to do every morning. It's time to let it go. Anyway, so I really do believe in metrics as far as that kind of stuff goes. I mean, because you have hard facts in front of you. It's not like, remember when the papers used to run the bridge column? This is only for you older folks in the papers. There was like bridge games, answers to bridge questions. Those ran forever because there was one little old lady from Hackensack who wrote into the paper whenever they tried to take it out saying, "Where's my bridge column?" Now we actually have metrics. So we can say, oh yeah, it is just that one little gray-haired lady in Hackensack, so we can stop doing it. Anyway, that's my answer.
Story budgets. We write these laborious documents for an audience of 5.
Yeah.
From
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
From a social media perspective, I think what we should stop doing is, how do I say this? Because I'm on film.
Cut the mic.
So one of the things that I think we should be doing from a social media perspective is trying to tweet every 8 minutes, or trying to pump out 1,000 trillion zillion tweets. Look at, I think I'm piggybacking off of what one of my colleagues up here is saying, is that look at what stories are doing well. We have the analytic tools to look at what stories are doing well and tweet and Facebook those stories and push those stories. Now, sometimes you're going to have to, what I always say, you're going to have to make your readers eat their vegetables, right? So there are some stories that may or may not be as popular as something would be, Bruce Springsteen or whatever coming to your respective cities. But there are some things that people need to know and that we are, as journalists, responsible for letting people know. That's making sure that our audience eat their vegetables. But I don't think that every I don't think that people's Twitter feed has to have something every 10 seconds or every 10 minutes floating through their timeline, because what happens is that you're going to end up watering down the quality of your tweets and your Facebook posts and your Instagram posts, and so you're going to be inundated and preoccupied now with only pushing content versus pushing quality content. You're still, as a social media person, if any of you here, I'm sure maybe one or two of you here doing some social media in your respective organizations, and you are a storyteller. Even though you may not be a reporter, you are still a storyteller. There's no other profession in the newsroom right now where that person gets to write the story 3 or 4 other times, the same story 3 or 4 other ways for our particular news brands. And so we are still storytellers, and we have to be accurate, and we have to be compelling. It's just like the reporter is challenged to do that. But you can't really do that if you're pushing out 10 tweets a second. There's no way for you to do that. So one of the things that I would say, again, is to reevaluate the number of tweets and Facebook posts and whatever that you're posting, and focus on the quality and not necessarily the quantity.
Great, thank you. Next question.
Hi, I'm Ben from McClatchy. Christopher, I wanted to ask you, as you were talking about sort of pulling apart the body of a journalism organization and looking at the important DNA and reforming it, it made me think about some of what public libraries have done over the last decade, and I was wondering if you see them as competition, partnership, and if anyone else's relationship with public library, I'd be interested in that.
No one's ever allowed to say public libraries are competition. That's never a popular thing to say. Public libraries are never competition is the right answer. I think in that idea of, I like that we're saying a lot more often we are in the attention industry, and so we are competing with everyone. I think that's a helpful square one. So sure, the getting out, like, yeah, F. Scott Fitzgerald from the library is competition from reading your long form piece. Yes, but I think in terms of like creating a space in which a community comes together and solves problems, totally. But I think that is a partnership opportunity. I think we definitely see that logic of any news organization should be responsible for the success or failure of the community they represent. And so libraries for a geographically niche community are a really great place to engage lots of different people, as are any safe environment that lots of people feel welcome. So yeah, fantastic partners. We actually do, even in tech space, do a lot of events with libraries in at least in all 5 of the communities we publish. We have done tech events very intentionally because communities that are not necessarily always serviced by technology, communities are welcome there. So yeah, I think libraries are an example of a great place to engage a community if you have a geographical niche.
Thank you, great.
Jason, I just wanted to say first that your talk really resonated with me, so thank you for doing that. I think I might be a few years out from the whippersnappers that you were addressing, but I do see my 22 and 23-year-old colleagues who are on breaking news beats facing this stuff every day, and I'm wondering if you have any advice about how I can be supportive to them as they're dealing with all of this.
I think one of the best things, and I actually saw this done by someone rather than this is something that I did. Mike DePel, who was one of the editors who I worked with while we were dealing with the Newtown tragedy, he was so good. The people who came in, like Digital First Media, like has a whole bunch of newspapers, right? New Haven Register was one of them. And we brought people, young reporters from all over the region to help with Sandy Hook. So it was a lot of real kids. And Mike just, he made sure he talked to reporters before they went out. If it was going to be their 3rd funeral that day, he said, no, we're going to send somebody else. He paid close attention to all of the reporters at all times. If someone was off in a corner, he would find them, and he would talk to them. I mean, I think it's about looking after each other as human beings. A lot of the signs are there. Editors are not really known for their warmth. And I do think that there's a lot to be gained from sort of the traditional editing relationship. Some of the best instruction I ever got was a raised eyebrow. which said, "What the fuck?" And I knew I never wanted to see that again, so I changed my ways. But I think you can still do that and actually be there for your staff. You just pay attention, I mean, to a certain extent, if you're an editor, they are your responsibility, I think.
I work a lot with young people, and I think there is a balance between listening to them. A lot of them feel like nobody ever listens to them, and then setting the boundaries. Somebody once said very well that it's the job of mentors to teach the boundaries without breaking their spirit. I really like that.
Oh, next question.
I'm Casey. I'm with the Asheville Citizen-Times, Oregon at Paper in North Carolina. And I have a question for Stephanie or anyone else who has wisdom on this, on what your line is for negative comments. So what is your kind of troll line? We try to be really responsive to critics, so when someone says, "You're not covering X," or "I don't like the way you wrote about this," we try to respond and have a dialogue about it. When they say, "All your reporters are fat and ugly," we don't. So what, do you have any wisdom on, sort of how far you go, how far you'll wade into negative comments, and what's worth your time and what's not?
Oh God, this is a conversation. Please, we need to, everybody, I want to talk to everybody after the thing. This is like something that's near and dear to my heart, because comments, we've been talking about comments here at ONA all week, and we've also seen some of the decisions that some of our colleagues in the news in our business make around limiting and or eliminating comments. And so let me just be very clear. I am in favor of comments. I personally don't think it's fair to ask people to purchase or read our content without giving them an opportunity to respond. I do think that there are better ways to do it, and so we need to be creative. I mean, there are a lot of smart people in this business, and somebody can come up with a way for which we can remain the integrity of open dialogue with our readers and eliminate or limit the derogatory comments. So the line for comments for me to answer your question is, I follow the rules and regulations of my news organization at the time. So, my news organization has regulations and stipulations for what it considers to be, derogatory comments. And obviously we know that racist comments about someone's gender, comments about attacking or inciting violence, comments attacking a victim, those are things that I think that we all kind of instinctively know. There are also some of us who believe that certain curse words shouldn't be included in the comments. The wisdom, I think, is that we should always be having conversations around what comments get deleted and what comments should stay. And I'm talking about barring those things that I just mentioned. Obviously, the comments that are not adding to the conversation, and I think that's the key. Asking yourselves, we always have these guiding questions when it comes to ethics in journalism. Asking yourself, is this conversation, is this comment adding to the conversation in a constructive way? If the answer is yes, then we need to have a conversation, even if we don't necessarily like the language around it, then maybe we should have a conversation about keeping that comment. I'm talking about something like if someone drops the F-bomb, but they make a really good point, or or they say some sort of curse. And frankly, like I'm a user of the F-bomb, and I'm always making good points I make my best points using that word. So I think, but I think that we need to, the wisdom, I think, is we should all be talking about this all the time. Is this comment adding to the conversation? And that's where I think we've derailed the idea of comments. You don't just remove something because it's hard. We wouldn't be practicing this craft if it was easy all the time. What you do is you dig your heels in and you figure out a way to get it done. And that's my wisdom on comment. We can talk about it later. I've got a lot to say about it.
I'd just like to address that really briefly as the guy who crashed the panel. The best thing I think you can do is have a really simple declaration of your rules right there. These are the rules. For me, one of the best things I've ever written was be responsible, honest, discreet, and civil. And those criteria can really help you watch that community.
Great. Other questions? And if you'd prefer to tweet your questions, I'm taking a look, keeping an eye out on the hashtag if anybody wants to be more secretive with their questions. Discreet, discreet, yes, exactly.
Be civil, though.
Any other questions? All right, we'll get a mic to you. And anybody else, raise your hand so we can get the next mic to you for the next question.
I want to talk workflow. My name is Mel, and I'm with CNN, and anyone who works with me knows I talk about workflow all the time. You do. I think I love what you're saying about workflow. Everybody's workflow sucks. We could all get rid of a lot of inefficiencies and gain some time. But that is not something that one person can do alone. It is something that needs to be done by the entire newsroom, and you need buy-in from everybody. I appreciate you saying, let's fix this, but how would you get buy-in from your entire newsroom, or just even the key people in your newsroom?
It's a real challenge because people in our industry get hung up on procedures and processes, not just bridge columns, and they really get tied to those sorts of things. I think that if you work from the top down on efficiencies, something that bosses are very focused on, how to have fewer people doing the work, being able to focus more on creative stuff, you'll have the benefit there. Also, when people overcome their initial resistance to new things and realize it's actually easier, you'll get buy-in at that approach. I just had this recently. We had to roll out not one, but 2 CMSs in training along with a redesign. And when it's actually is an easier tool to use, I think people are accepting of it, very much so. But some of the solutions will come from technology. Some of the problems we have are because we have these big proprietary CMSs that cost $820,000 and are difficult to fix and don't work well with the other thing we offer online. So some of the cures will come in technology as we go forward. But the bottom line, I got to tell you, 14-year-old kids in their homes have access to more readily accessible and easier to use publishing systems than many of us do. And that's what we have to address and fix.
That's very true.
But also, I would imagine every news organization in the world is taking donations to buy those new systems. I mean, that's the only thing. I mean, that's a huge problem because, I mean, all of those different systems that you're talking about, and I know exactly what you're talking about, and I live with it right now, there just doesn't seem to be like the money or the will to really, because the smart person would do it from scratch. Well, we've got legacy system on top of legacy system, and I don't think that's unique. As a matter of fact, I think we're probably better off than a lot of people.
I think, engage people at all levels. I used to work at the Miami Herald. I ran their online department in the 98, 99, 2000, and this is old news, but when they first went to that, CMS that all of us could share because it was so efficient, there wasn't a way to have a travel section in Miami. And I don't know about you, but that was kind of important in Miami to have a travel section. So you don't roll out a tool that completely neglects the serious needs of some of your users, and that just means more communication earlier in the process, I think is really key.
Great.
As Janine, as the foremost expert on Spanish language media in the world, what are Spanish language publishers, either online or in print, doing that English language publishers aren't and should get their heads out of their whatever and pay attention to?
He's being very humble. He is on my board of directors, and I use his name when I fundraise. I think there's a lot we can learn from digital natives in general, not just Latin America, although I'm really excited to bring some of the best practices we're learning there back to the U.S. It's part of the mission of my Knight Fellowship, which supports my work on this, to bring back some of our best findings. But to get to some of this, a lot of it has to do with working as teams from the start. This is not new to most of you, but journalism has historically been this very linear process, and we really need to start thinking about the digital media multiple options from the very beginning of the process, not as an add-on at the end. And a lot of the digital natives are coming up with very innovative ways to tell stories and searchable database solutions in place of a series of stories because they're thinking about working as a team from the start, because they're thinking about all the different ways you can tell stories from the start, and they don't have that legacy problem. So I think studying some of those best practices like Efecto Cucuyo and how they've used a WhatsApp application to do election monitoring by having people in a whole bunch of places on a shared connection. That's not a revolutionary idea, but it's one that's really made a difference there. Ojo Público in Peru doing this database of health providers, which is similar to one of the Code Africa projects, which is finding your quacks before you end up with them as doctors. And instead of writing about the doctors that are a problem after the fact, creating a database where people can search for doctors' credentials before they go to them, really thinking about solutions-based journalism and not just covering the problems after. Just some of the many, many things that I'm learning as we do this research in Latin America. Thanks, Neil.
I wanted to go back to the workflow question. So my name's Irene, and I work at the Arizona Daily Star in Tucson. The elephant in the room on workflow, I think, is print.
Yes.
Like, print is the problem. Like,
Oh, broadcast too. If you work in broadcast,
Yeah.
it's the same way. And you go ahead for the question.
well, so my question was, can you solve the workflow problem by moving print and digital into separate workflows and not trying to cram them together?
Some organizations are working to have separate print hubs that take the material that's published already on the web and then make a newspaper out of it. Indeed, in some shops, the print people are so separate that the content creators don't rewrite things for the newspaper, which is very normal. I'd like to physically lock reporters out of the print CMS so they don't stay late on a Friday night trimming a Sunday story. Let someone else do that, but that's kind of subversive, I realize. The gravity of print, the gravity of broadcast, you could almost say the tyranny of it is a great force. And it's really, really hard to make a newspaper. It's really, really hard to make a TV broadcast. It takes a lot of work. The challenge is to make it so that the material you make for both can apply with translation, with reformatting on all platforms. But there are other subversive ways to do it. One of my colleagues in San Diego actually built a CMS where it was physically impossible to put anything on the newspaper, unless it had already been on the web. You could not do it. So that's good. Again, subversive, but there are solutions like that. The other thing is, I don't want to say retasking the material can work because the translation is important, and if you just jam the crap that you make for the stuff you make for the newspaper and the crap you make for the web, it doesn't translate that well. I would also say to let some things that appear in the newspaper just be in the newspaper. They're fine there. We had a big special section that I knew would be one of those things that no one would read online, although Mrs. Peterson at home really liked it a lot in print. Let those be print-only things. That's fine that way. But you're right, it is a big challenge, especially when that yawning maw of vacant white space demands copy. The best thing to do is have a bunch of stuff on the web already that you can pull from to make that product.
Other questions? Or are folks ready to drink? Yeah.
To join me in drunken stupor?
Yeah. All right. Well, can we get one more round of applause for our wonderful...
No. I was just going to say we should have one more round of applause for our fearless moderator, who's way too homo.
Thank you. Thank you. All right.